Council URA work session to order. If you please join me in the flag salute. We have Mayor Benetti online tonight. Next item on the agenda is public comment. It doesn't look like we have any public comment tonight. Is there any online? Hearing none, I'll move on to the review of upcoming City Council and URA Board action items. Item A is discussion of 2020 housing needs analysis update and related work products. Is this you, Carolyn, or Jim?
It's Carolyn going to kick this off.
Hello. I'm thinking Jake may not have access to audio. We could work on that a little bit. In the meantime, he has it back. He has a PowerPoint that I'd like him to put up, if you could, on that first slide. Thank you, Jake. While he's putting that together, maybe I'll just give you just a tad bit of background before we do a deep dive into the presentation. As you may recall, when you worked on this in the last couple of years ago, I think you want to go back a couple of slides, Jake. The city worked on housing needs analysis. Back one more, please, to the cover page. This housing needs analysis is a requirement of the state of Oregon for cities to determine what kind of housing needs they have and what kind of land they have available to build in. And we're working through an update of that included a couple of other work items that we'll be talking about tonight. We've been through this process now beginning in last summer, and we're getting close to the end. DLCD funded a major portion of this project, and I outlined a bit of that in the staff report that you had before you that's part of the public record. Ultimately, we ended up with the Planning Commission, who was very helpful in seeing us through to where we are now. And if we could go to the next slide, and I can give you their recommendation. The Planning Commission recommended that the HNA update be adopted by resolution. They also recommended that the comprehensive plan amendments related to the updated HNA be adopted by ordinance, with the exception of amendments to the section of the comprehensive plan related to urban growth management. And that kind of ties into their last recommendation that the council accept the narrative and the policies in the comp plan related to urban growth management, and that they also accept as advisory the draft urban growth boundary expansion memo as an advisory document, and pick this up later. The work on that within a year's time. They indicated January 10th, 2024, that they would like to see the council provide some direction to work through some of the nuances and issues that are surrounding the agreements that the city has with the county and the information or lack thereof for which we can substantiate finalizing that memo. So that is their recommendation. And going on to the presentation overview on the next slide, Jake is going to walk you through the background and context of what the HNA amendments look like, comprehensive plan amendments look like, and the preliminary urban growth boundary expansion memo. So I'm here to answer any questions, but I'm going to hand off to Jake at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you again, council members, and address this matter. As Carolyn noted, we've been doing some work on the materials that we've brought to you previously. A lot of that has been addressing, familiarizing, and trying to communicate with some of the public who made comments on the matters. And so there's been revisions that are reflected in the materials that you see before you and that I'm going to discuss here today. And then Carolyn did a great job of an overview of how the Planning Commission landed on those materials. So I'll try to do a little bit of the same context setting that we did for them, and at a more or less high level, just kind of review where we've been and look at where things are at. So in August of last year, we went to the Planning Commission with our first evidentiary hearing related to this matter. We went to the council very shortly thereafter. That was the last time we had a formal meeting with the council on the topic. We met with the Planning Commission then again in September. This was a continued public hearing. I received further comments. The comments that were received at that meeting really became the sort of nugget of the review that we've done in the last few months. We came back to the Planning Commission on January 10th, just here a couple of weeks ago, and they formulated a recommendation based on some alternatives that were laid out, and really crafted their own recommendation based on some of the options that were laid out. So you've seen those, and they should be accessible to you at this point. So an overview of some of the public comments that we heard. This won't touch on every individual matter, but it's sort of thematically summarizing some of the public comment that we heard on the range of things that are proposed. So really three categories of what we're discussing: the housing needs analysis, which is an analysis, a formal study that is discrete and was proposed for adoption. The other thing was the amendments that accompany that housing needs assessment, that in a manner implement some of the findings of that housing needs analysis. And then the other piece was this expansion memo, UGB expansion memo, which was this yet again another discrete deliverable built into the sort of project scope, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. So some of the public comments, one of the things that we heard was some concern about the sufficiency of the environmental constraints that were included in our buildable lands inventory. This is a comment that came directly from one of the forms of testimony. So suitable locations for affordable housing in light of understandings and likely regulatory change associated with natural hazards. So essentially called into question whether we had provided enough analysis to address this. In a related concern about buildable lands, it's called into question whether the buildable lands inventory had taken into account market conditions sufficiently, looking at trends, looking specifically at affordability and price levels. And so these are comments that we took serious and evaluated. So from the outset, there was a lot of effort that was put into this update. I would say one of the key elements of the update was about addressing environmental constraints more aggressively, let's say. So really leaning into the environmental constraints that the community of Coos Bay is under. So it was adding quite a bit of land to the constraint category in the buildable lands inventory to say, hey, there's actually quite a bit more land here that isn't really utilizable for the kind of housing that is in demand in Coos Bay. So we actually removed hundreds of acres from the buildable lands inventory. So this was a critique that we're somewhat caught off guard by. Sort of expected the inverse to happen when it came to the adoption process, that someone would say, oh, you're being awfully aggressive here about the environmental constraints. But so we took a careful look at that and evaluated a few questions about how we could perhaps revise that. Ultimately, related to that and the market conditions analysis, which we undertook a market conditions analysis and looked at trends, and our approach was very much based on price points and affordability. So we interpreted that as a matter of degree. So to what point is the analysis that you conduct for something like this sufficient? It wasn't a matter of not having done it. Did we in fact not do it sufficiently? So we put the question to our DLCD senior housing planner to provide us with some guidance and some help in interpreting how we might strengthen that. So the comments that are in the record, that was their response, was DLCD has reviewed the city and LCOG's work on this HNA and would like to commend the project team on thorough and well thought analysis. DLCD does not believe it necessary for the factual basis the city uses to make HNA and BLI decisions to include speculative or even probable changes to financial or insurance regulations. So that's sort of getting at this component here. I've really distilled the public comment here, but part of it was, we know that certain things are going to happen in the future. We think that this might be something that the community would be vulnerable to. So DLCD's finding was, we can't be speculative in our analysis and have to really rely on what information we have for our factual basis. So this was, for us, sufficient feedback to feel comfortable with the analysis in this particular regard. Some other concerns that we heard, there was some concern about the vacancy rate that was applied. We brought that back to the Planning Commission and to the council. And but one of the concerns was that a traditional sort of perception of vacancy rate is that market vacancy rate. So if you're a real estate agent, you're seeing a vacancy rate that's actually quite a bit smaller than the sort of real vacancy rate. When we apply a vacancy rate for a housing needs analysis, we want to make sure we're using a number that really represents units that aren't being occupied or aren't being occupied in a manner that can be considered accommodating our housing need. If we use a smaller number, then we're really underrepresenting, or rather overrepresenting the stock of housing that we have. So we really want to focus on the census real vacancy rate, not the market vacancy rate. So we provided some clarification on that, and from what I understand, most folks were satisfied by that response. The housing needs analysis, there was one commenter who actually marked up the housing needs assessment. So we'll look at that here in a second and kind of see what it was that we thought were logical and reasonable updates, and some of those were included. One of the comments was that the state is going to be pursuing a new methodology for establishing housing needs, and that the process should wait. Again, our DLCD representatives pointed to our contract to complete this project, pointed to the fact that it's not uncommon to have legislation that's out and has the potential to change things down the road, but those timeframes are very unpredictable, that there wouldn't be cause to wait. But it is in fact a reality. There is a directive that the legislature gave to DLCD to look at new methods. It is unclear when that's actually going to commence. The UGB expansion memo fails to adequately account for nuances around Coos County's urban growth areas. So this was a really significant one. It's a matter that I've become quite a bit more familiar with in the last few months. the concern that had been raised previously, but the real nuance around this particular concern is something that really ripples through portions of what we're adopting. And so when you heard this recommendation from the Planning Commission, it really is a reflection of a lot of this nuance. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So the revisions that you would see to the housing needs assessment from the time you last saw it, there's really some sort of clarifying. There's a little bit of terminology distinction. The primary terminology distinction that emerged was utilizing the term demand versus the term need. So there was a request made to utilize a term housing demand, and the term housing need shows up throughout that document. And so we didn't see a reason not to change that terminology to accommodate that request. And so we changed every occurrence of the term need to the term demand. And so you see quite a bit of red that's related specifically to that change. Some of the other changes that occurred were some rewording to trends to kind of flesh out a little bit more what it was that we had done, make it more clear how the analysis had treated things like the change in age demographics and the needs that changing age demographics would result in the housing market and in the need to accommodate. Some of the other things were just terminology to change. So there wasn't a significant amount of changes that occurred. Most of what you would see in the red and strike through was related to a change in terms around need and demand. But there weren't a lot of suggested changes after about the first 20 pages of the document. So that's really how the HNA has been revised from the last time you saw it. One of the things that if you looked through this, you would have seen a reference error. This is something that we'll obviously fix. Something happened in an iteration where these references to figures got out of sync. And so every now and again, you'll see one of these references. And those obviously in any final version will change and be updated. So the comprehensive plan amendments, this is one part sort of overview, and then one part identifying some of the changes that have emerged since we last were in front of you. So there's narrative amendments. The comprehensive plan has narrative sections, which are sort of they provide context, and they sort of set the stage for the policies and strategies. And so some of the changes that are being introduced are related to natural disasters and hazards. Again, we leaned into these environmental constraints, and by doing so, we really needed to leverage the standing of the comprehensive plan to back those up, right? So the state says, well, if you're considering these areas not part of your housing inventory or your land inventory for residential lands, then you need to do something in your comp plan to back that up. So that's part of what these adjustments were. Some of these were things that were just kind of blatant omissions, right? So there wasn't discussion around some of these really key hazards for Coos Bay. For example, earthquakes were really downplayed are currently downplayed in Coos Bay's comp plan. So there's a proposal here to identify those as actually quite considerable threats to the community. Housing obviously has some updates that would be related to the narrative. Urban growth management proposed some changes, and then the residential land section has some updates to the narrative. As far as the policies and strategies are concerned, again, policies that essentially point to the comprehensive plan document, which is the overarching document for the community that really provides the standing for the development code to implement. And so it's not a place where you nest really specific development code provisions type, regulatory detail. It's where you establish high level policy that the development code would enact. So we have examples where these policies have been introduced. We think that these are really important policies in any case for the city of Coos Bay to enact and to recognize, to really give an appropriate nod to the natural hazards that the city is subject to, and to enable the sort of proper planning around those. There's a new policy that's proposed that is essentially just a general, there's a comparable in the economic development section of the comprehensive plan that just talks about, a recognition of the fact that the city should be watching and mindfully tracking on the economic land needs that the city has. And so there's a counterpart that's proposed for residential lands. Urban growth management. So these are the policies that, with that recommendation that the Planning Commission made, and essentially was a recommendation of staff to consider, was that that the city proceed with the comprehensive plan amendments that are related to natural hazards. There's really two main categories of the comp plan amendments. There's the environmental constraints, the natural hazards, and there's the urban growth management component. What we've found over the last few months is that essentially the comprehensive plan elements related to urban growth management just remain in a place of kind of in a complicated context. So it's something that really requires an effort that's, I would say, outside of the scope of this project, to identify and answer some very key questions that allow the process to proceed without discontinuity, with some congruency about how the jurisdictional players view the current setting. So this is an example. Anything that we've looked at here that are comp plan amendments currently proposed that relates to urban growth management, to the UGB, to annexation. These are things that essentially the Planning Commission's recommendation is to pull those out now. Focus on those later, table those, receive them as advisory, as concepts that need to be further vetted and perhaps further refined. So I'm putting them up on the screen here. We had the concept of a UGB land exchange as a potential means to address some of the land constraints in a manner that's not as beholden to the fairly strict approach that Goal 14 demands, or rather the priority expansion process. So that's the comprehensive plan memos. And again, to summarize, kind of two categories. One is related to the environmental constraints. It's certainly staff's opinion. The Planning Commission seemed to agree that throwing that baby out with the bathwater of the urban growth management elements would probably not be a good idea. So that recommendation the Planning Commission made was to preserve the natural resource, the natural hazard elements of the comp plan updates, and to table, except as advisory, anything related to urban growth management. Which, speaking of urban growth management, that UGB expansion memo really was about providing a discussion of some of those elements. So really, when we scoped the UGB expansion memo, the purpose was to create a basic characterization of possible distinct units for expansion analysis. So what Oregon's rules refer to as UGB expansion study areas. So part of it was just a sort of educational tool to say, here's how you do an expansion within the state of Oregon. There's statutes and rules that apply directly and specifically to that process. Here's how that works. So a very general sort of outlining of the process. Putting Coos Bay's housing needs assessment into the context of that, putting Coos Bay in general into the context of that is another piece of that UGB expansion memo's purpose. And then looking at considerations for possible next steps relative to residential land needs. So a component that was really wired into the expansion memo was to consider things like the urban growth management agreement that the city of Coos Bay has with the county to clarify in what I think this memo was scoped was a sort of naive oversimplification of that dynamic in Coos Bay and Coos County right now. And so the process that emerged there turned the memo really into a setting where a lot of questions were raised, a lot of assumptions could be questioned and could be called into question for further insight and a number of perspectives raised. And so the expansion memo goes over the steps to expand your UGB memo. There's 6 steps. Every one of these has an implication when it comes to how the city's UGB is currently constituted. And so, really at the end of the day, I think that the key question, as I understand it around this, is how do we best define the city of Coos Bay's current UGB? So that's a really important question to nail down. If there is in fact a question about that, it is definitely difficult to proceed with policies that relate to urban growth management. If you don't have your footing, you can't take a nice jump, right? So that's one way to think about that. The housing needs assessment, on the other hand, I would say, and I think there's an argument that's been positive, which is, well, then we can't really do anything. And I think the argument to be made there is that the housing needs assessment is proceeding with an assumption that the Coos Bay housing urban growth boundary, as it's been mapped within the city and shown within city documents, is the framework for that study, and that further process and research really does need to be conducted to establish a real understanding about areas around the perimeter of the UGB, what the standing is there. Had a really great conversation with the Coos County planner who provided some really useful insights about some of our public comments and the perspectives that we've had. And really the culmination of that conversation was that we can look through documents probably all day long, but the ultimate resolution to what exists as a sort of understanding for urban growth management dynamics in Coos Bay and Coos County is really going to be a political one. It's going to be one that requires process and consensus and some decision making. And that's something that shouldn't be postponed too much longer, so that processes like this, again, have some firm ground to stand on to take next steps. And so the steps that seem to be particularly vulnerable to the confusion around that have been pulled out of this particular version of the recommendation. The recommendation is to pull out urban growth management elements, to take anything related to that, including the urban growth boundary expansion memo, and think of that as advisory, tabled for future conversation to be revisited and revised. But that the work of the HNA has real value. The improvement to natural hazards, to environmental constraints is a big deal. We've removed hundreds of acres from the buildable lands inventory for residential land, which means we've increased the case ultimately for more accommodating land to account for housing needs in the future. And so stepping away from that might be a mistake. So that's really, I do have other slides here that go in more detail over the UGB expansion memo, but it's really just going into more detail on these steps. I think based on at least the Planning Commission's recommendation, I'll probably hold off on that unless there's a specific desire that voiced to go through those details. The UGB expansion memo is illustrative, right? So the memo includes some maps that have specific areas that we try to be super clear that what we're trying to show here is one way that this could happen, not the way, not even the way that maybe we would recommend if we had more time to really look more deeply into that, is just to provide a learning opportunity about UGB expansion and provide an illustrative example for that. So that's really our presentation, providing that update, and happy to field questions about it when the time is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Council, do you have any questions for Jacob or comments? Mayor, did you have a comment on this?
Well, not on this specifically, but to the plan itself. I mean, I don't know if we're at that point. I'm glad to weigh in and give you some commentary, but I'm not sure if Carolyn wants to make any more comments before I do that.
What I could do is just let you know what the next steps may be after your meeting tonight, but I can do that after you provide your comments, Mayor.
Well, first of all, I want to thank LCOG and staff for all the hard work and time they put into this. Obviously, you know, they came to us, if I want to recap a little bit, so they came to us and we felt that the housing needs analysis was not adequate. I guess that's the best way to put it. And so we didn't accept it and went back to the Planning Commission, and LCOG went ahead and did some more in-depth research and took some commentary. And that commentary was because I had reached out to some community members to do an analysis and read this. And one of the reasons this ended up with Al Johnson. Al Johnson is a land use attorney that practiced, and because of his efforts, abandoned dunes exist today. His commentary is in our packet tonight, and it's just not a few pages, it's 16 pages of documentation of why he believes that this is something that we should not adopt. He goes into a lot of a lot of detail about different scenarios, economic development, and other things that Jacob had referenced here. So in my opinion, my humble opinion, I'm glad that they addressed the UGB the way they did, and they said accept, because it's complicated. I can be simplistic about how we can get there, because I talked to Jill Ralphie along with Jim Hosley, and we had met with Bill Greil also, and we realized that this can be done, and but it's correct, Jacob, it has to be done through political ways, and that political way would be first a land use comprehensive plan, and the county commissioners would have to adopt this, and then there's steps, and it would take some time to go through that. Same side on Coos Bay Council. So there were some political hurdles that we have to get over first to see if that can even be done. And I'm glad that that's been situated, that they're accepting that UGB grant or UGB analysis. I also believe that we should accept the housing needs analysis and in a resolution. I don't think that we should adopt. There are a lot of things that have been talked about. We don't have a crystal ball here, and I feel that this housing needs, if we adopt it, would be we would be adopting something that we don't know about. I think there's too many dynamics, and there's nothing wrong. In fact, going back and looking through documentation prior to this, LCOG had mentioned that we can adopt this or accept this through a resolution. And that's what I'm recommending, that we do the housing needs analysis and we accept the resolution, not adopt it. So that would be my commentary. I know what the Planning Commission stated, and I know, Carolyn, that you had indicated to them and directed them to adopt that motion by your commentary, but I still think that we should accept it instead of adopt it.
Thank you, Mayor.
I would just ask what Carolyn thinks with the verbiage, accept instead of adopt, and why it would be important not to, or if that's acceptable.
Well, the adoption, and this is, the idea of adopting it, just like you adopted the last HNA in 2020, when you adopt one of these HNAs, you've bought yourself 8 years of time for that HNA to be considered accurate and in effect. And the HNA that you adopted in 2020 takes you to 2028. So in 2028, you will have to adopt another HNA. That's just the way the law is put together. If you decide not to adopt this HNA, this is my understanding, that 2028 year is going to be that's the marker year when you're going to have to you have to do this. By that time, much of this data may be outdated. It's hard to say. If you adopt it now, you will not have to revisit this until 2031. But that's a decision that you can make how you want to handle that. So either way you go is okay. You will meet the intent of the agreement between the city and DLCD. They were a major funder here. So you can go with the other alternative just accepting it as advisory for possible use at a later date, something like that, if you like.
Carolyn, I just want to ask, I think you said it, but I just want to make sure I heard it correctly. If we simply accept it, we have met our contractual obligations with DLCD, correct?
You have.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Stephanie again. The comment was made in the report that, portions of this are speculative. I think that a lot of it is, it's all speculative, really. And so something could be very different next year,
Agreed.
which, a longer timeline we're operating under if we go to 2031. I don't know if it's just because it's a matter of money we've paid and we're trying to gain as much time out of this as we can. Those are just some comments that I had.
Sure. Just for reference, the contribution by DLCD last time, and last time I think it was $85,000. This time it was $60,000. So when the time comes for you to update this, you would need to go back to DLCD and ask them for additional funding if that's the direction that you go.
So this is Joe again. What this would do is buy us 3 years more time. I don't know if it's worth it to adopt under that scenario. I think from now till 2026 or even a few more years down the road that we might have a clearer picture. This analysis that LCOG put together is very useful. I mean, we can use this and accept it for further consideration because, like I said, they did a lot of work. And I think there's a lot of information we can use, and we can utilize this and update this information or this analysis that they have for a plan that we might need to do in 2028. But there's economic factors that we don't even know about. I mean, we're talking about the port with some huge economic potential, and if it does, that basically this becomes obsolete immediately. So I think by waiting a little bit and seeing how things play out will give us a better format and direction on how we need to go, and then we can draft and instead of just accepting it, we can adopt something down the road that might be a better fit. And then on top of it, we get to look at the urban growth boundary analysis with the county and see how it fits politically, and if we can format that in also, so we can have a complete plan down the road with more information, is how I feel.
Yeah, I agree with what the mayor's saying. I think we should accept it, not adopt it, but I will say that there is some good information in here. And one thing that stands out is that it says 77% of new units are projected to be in the middle housing category: duplex, triplex, quadplex, and 5+ units. And I think that speaks to the MUPP program that we're looking at.
It does. If I could make one more comment, you have a 2020 H&A in place today. So if there are programs that the state comes up with down the road that requires substantiation of request for funding for housing development, they will use that 2020 H&A to to do their evaluation. So that is one of the things that they're talking about is, find a way to fund it through the state. So we'll see. But I think it's important that you realize that we will be using that 2020 H&A. We're in fact using it right now for our housing production strategy. We were instructed that by DLCD that is what is in place right now. You cannot use your update work. You must use what has already been adopted. So when that work effort comes to you in a month or two, it'll be based on what we have in place right now. So just a point that I want to share with you.
So Caroline, I don't know if the 2020 is that much difference and going to make that much difference to us versus this one, but let me ask you this question. If we felt it was necessary for whatever reason that we were going to try to get something to help us in the housing throughout the state, we could go ahead and go back and adopt this at any time. Am I correct?
You are. However, we'll have to come up, if you choose not to adopt it now, we will be coming back to you with a resolution accepting the work, and that'll say you've met the contractual obligation with DLCD. We will not be coming back with findings for all of the conclusions that we did with the 2020 H&A. So that piece of the work will have to be done. You won't be able to just pull it out and say, this is good now, we want to submit it. There will be more work that will have to be done to get you through that process. So Jake, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's right, Caroline. I think the mayor's right. The longer the time span goes, the sort of trickier it becomes to adopt something, right, in good faith that has, to speak really quickly to something that's been mentioned, which is just a reality of planning, right? You set out a plan and you make forecasts, so the very nature of what you're doing is speculative, right? And it's one reason why, one of the comments that we got was, well, it's not taking into account all these speculative things. There is a sort of cutoff point. That's why we rely on certain data sources to say we will speculate based on X, but there's a point where the tea leaves have to be sort of stepped back from. So all that to say that, you're going to be speculating. Things can change in the next couple of years. I would not disagree that Coos Bay is in a bit of a unique place given, Oregon and the world are in kind of a unique place. The port is an interesting nuance that's been added. It is a dangerous, slippery slope to get into let's just wait until this happens to make our plan. At some point, you got to jump in with both your feet. There's no question that the UGB dynamic is an important thing for the city and county to figure out to make any kind of future process a little more clear. So you're right, though, Caroline. That's how I would characterize that. You pick it up, and a lot of work's been done, but there would be a process that would still have to commence, and it would cost something.
What's the time frame for something like that to get the findings that would need to be done? Are we talking months?
Well,
the findings would be.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that any process means months, because there's just you got to get in line to have a meeting. You got to notice. You got to do all those things. So the months, the findings themselves are probably something that, you know, any planner with a regular work plate could fit in within a 30-day period or something. But
The other point that I think is important is if you do go in this direction to accept and not adopt, you consider identifying a time frame by which this is all gonna be reconciled. The Planning Commission recommended 1 year relative to the UGB, preliminary UGB memo. And I'm gonna venture a guess, and I'd like your comment too on this, Jake, as well, is that if you wait no matter how long you wait, you're going to have to go through this information again with the public through your public hearing process. But the longer you wait, the more, I think, challenge you may find to the analysis that's in the document now, because you're right, things change. You know, next year, anything could happen. So anyway, just another thing to think about.
So
Well, I
Carolyn,
think that's the point. Things can change and we don't know. I mean, that's the whole context of my, discussion here. And, and the Planning Commission, Carolyn, said a year, but my understanding because I watched the meeting, was that they wanted us to address this in a year. They didn't want this sitting on the table. I think that we can start addressing the UGB immediately, but there's still a process that's going to take, and Jacob can chime in on this, and so can you. It's going to take us at least a year, if not longer, because the comprehensive plan, even if the county commissioners agree to it and we agree to it, there's hearings, public hearings, and a process to go through. I would imagine all that's going to take probably a year. I don't know. And then we can get to the bottom line on it. But anyway.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think the fact that you've brought up the idea of a year and a half from now is very good. Because, that speaks to the idea that, there's going to be movement on this fairly quickly and it won't go on the shelf. So that's great.
yeah, I think my key hope with any utilizing these documents in an advisory role is I do think we made some really good progress on the environmental constraint front. That would have represented a meaningful step forward in the direction that I have perceived from whether it was the advisory committee or the commission or council to be a really important value for the community to really accurately represent housing opportunities. So that was a big step. It was kind of a bold step. My hope is that in any revisitation of this, that survives both as a key theme, and then also sort of that it doesn't somehow erode from some other place that hasn't emerged in this process. So I think that's a really important thing that was a gain here that I hope is preserved going forward.
I agree with you, Jacob. I think that's totally something that we need to do. And again, I want to commend the LCOG for the work they did. This analysis and this documentation and information we have is something, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not a planner by any means, but I think this is something that we can use on a regular basis and continue to keep it on the shelf, as you would state.
So, I'm kind of changing my mind on this now after listening to Carolyn and Jacob, because we already have the 2020 HNA in place, and I wasn't really pleased with that one. I actually like this one better than that one. So I'm not sure why we wouldn't want to replace the last one.
I think this puts us in a situation that we are going to dictate. I would recommend that you go through everything that was submitted to us with this, like Al Johnson, 16 pages, and all the other documentation that's been changed. I think there's some unknowns out there, and this like Jacob said, we don't know. I mean, this is all speculative. That's exactly what he said. I think that we're in a position that's unique, as also Jacob mentioned, that with the port and everything else. This gives us 3 years more if we adopted it today. That's how I look at it. I think that we wait a few years and then we have a clearer picture on what to change in this documentation. Because I don't think we throw it out by any means, but you can adapt it and adopt it and make some changes to it. And so, I mean, also, it could be problematic. We don't know what's going down the road. Also, if we accept this, then we're looking at, how things could be appealed that we're not even thinking about. There's, because of the unknowns. And we want development to happen, so I think we need to keep this, accept it, but not adopt it.
This is Councilor Matthews. I'm just wondering if this is a more desirable analysis and plan, if it makes sense to put this one in place. And these are just questions, prompts for y'all. To accept it in place with the predictions therein, and if should things change, then we revisit it at that point in time, not necessarily. So that when we do get an update on the analysis and the plan, but we have the ability to make changes when those uncertainties or those new things that we're worried about do pop up. It kind of not necessarily throws it out of the, throws the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but we at least have a place to start that's fresher than where we're at right now. I don't know.
Can I make a quick comment on that? Just, you're in the unique position, the really important position of deciding how to address this. So that's 100% deference to how you and your important role, which I don't envy, need to decide. I think some key variables here from LCOG's perspective, I won't speak directly for Carolyn, but we've been of one mind through most of this process, including review of the public comments. There's, I think, been quite a bit of validation of concern that we've heard from the commenters, quite a bit of time spent in reviewing the comments, talking to those, consulting with those who we feel we need to trust to understand and sort out those comments and come up with the best outcome. DLCD looked over the report and said that it was good work, that it was sound. This speculative component, I mean, I'm not changing my mind about what I said earlier. I mean, there's just always going to be variables that you're uncertain about. From a planner's perspective, that doesn't mean you don't plan and you keep waiting. It's sort of to the point of what Councilor Matthews was mentioning, that you step into it, you maintain some form of agility to be responsive. But a part of what we did was I would call it a risk analysis, to say from staff's perspective, pull these pieces out. They seem objectively unsteady. The other things are, I would say, par for the course for planning that happens in communities in Coos Bay. I think that the 2022 update to the 2020 HNA is an improvement in about every respect when it comes to the analysis. Yeah, we can't include what might happen next year. That's not the nature of planning. We try to anticipate it, but we don't know. And so I do think that there's improvement in there. I don't think, I don't think that it is, this is me. I don't think that there is significant risk to the community in adopting the HNA as is. That's been my position after extracting these other components. But I also don't think that anything turns inside out or completely upside down by pursuing that more conservative and let's wait and see approach. So just hoping that you all have a sense for at least the folks who've been immersed in this from our perspective on some of the risks associated with this. And obviously a lot of important perspectives to bring to bear here.
Thank you,
Let me ask you
Jacob.
something, Jacob. If the terminal facility goes into action and happens with the port, how accurate is this housing needs analysis now?
Considering like the workforce housing element that.
Well,
that
all of
Sandy's
it. I mean, we're talking about a development that could have economic development that's pending right now, and we don't know what the outcome is. So if that happens in 6 months or even a year, this housing needs, buildable land analysis and housing needs analysis is obsolete, because we're talking thousands of jobs that all of a sudden this doesn't meet that criteria. And that's the reason I'm saying there's nothing wrong with waiting a little bit and checking it out. If you look at Al Johnson's comment, the current draft BLI and housing needs addresses many issues. However, it does so what appears to be incorrect underlying assumptions that these facts need to be determined in part by state officials of the Department of Land Conservation. So what I'm saying is there's some things that we just don't know, and they are speculative, but I think it's the wrong take at this point, at this juncture, for us to adopt this. And accepting it and utilizing this information is not going to hurt us. It's going to help us. But if we adopt it, then we, in my opinion, there are appealable and arguably something that could be problematic down the road that we don't know about at this time, with a lot of moving parts that could potentially happen. So, with economic development being one of them.
Yeah. I mean, I respectfully disagree with the conclusion that the report has particularly vulnerable elements in it. I don't disagree with the fact that it wouldn't hurt, meaning I really don't think that it is there's an option that's great and an option that's awful. I don't think that that's the case. I do think, we worked with the city of Coos Bay on the Jordan Cove project, and it's been at least 3 or 4 years. And I know that it was happening long before that. So there is definitely some wisdom in thinking about stepping into a planning process, thinking about the advantages that you can realize right now, as opposed to waiting until everything settles perfectly to step into it. And that's just sort of a planner's perspective, and working with communities who don't have a perfect sense for what's happening next, but want to have some sure foundation to take some kind of a step forward. So that would be my response to that. I mean, there's no question that if that landed, you'd have ripples when it comes to housing, which is really what we're talking about, is the housing needs. So yeah, you're right. That would be let's update this HNA and get better numbers in here.
Well, I have a question. If something like what you're proposing, Mayor Benetti, comes through, when we have a giant change in our housing needs, are we going to be better with the current plan that we have or with this updated plan?
I think it who you ask the question to. If you ask it to Jacob, he's going to probably tell you this plan. If you ask it to Al Johnson, he's going to probably tell you the plan that you have now. So I think it depends on who you ask. Planners are going to have difference of opinions, and that's why this discussion is going on. Again, I don't disagree with this comment. I mean the data that they put before us. But again, I don't see any benefit into adopting this. I see we can just, it's much better for us to accept it. So that was, am I wrong in that analysis, Jacob?
The difference of opinion, I think you're right. So I don't think there are tremendous differences, frankly, partly because like if you were at a place where one housing needs analysis showed a deficit of land and the other analysis showed a surplus of land, you're literally sitting on top of a fence and you're going one way or the other. The analyses that we did got us closer to a place where we have less surplus of buildable land. It did establish and made some progress in saying that, hey, these lands that are subject to environmental hazards, they are not part of our housing inventory. They should not be assumed to be accommodating future housing. So when the workforce stuff comes in and there's all these new workers and residents, do not go to that area. Don't think of that as something that we need. We need more than that. And so, but that's why I say I hope that those persist in a situation where this isn't adopted. I hope that that concept just naturally proceeds, that work and analysis just continues forward, and you're able to make that case out of the gate. So.
Well, I'm okay with accepting it, but I will say that I think that the concerns that the mayor has about this plan do apply to the current plan as well. Would that be correct, Jacob?
Yes, I don't know exactly what the concerns are. If what you're saying is Al Johnson's comments about our current plan would apply to our previous plan, there's probably some dots that, I mean, we used a similar methodology.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Is there any further discussion on this topic?
When will this be brought back to council?
I believe it's just about a month away when it comes back to council.
Yeah. And I believe it's the 21st.
Okay, thank you.
Did council have any comments or discussion on the comprehensive plan amendments portion of this?
I just wanted to thank ALCOG and also Al Johnson, Bill Greil, and Crystal Shoji. This is not my area of expertise at all. And a lot of time, and the staff obviously, a lot of time went in from all parties involved. So I just wanted to thank all for all of their work in this space.
Thanks, Lucinda. Any other comments?
I just want to reiterate what Lucinda said, and I said previously. So a lot of hard work went into this by our staff and LCOG, and there's a lot of factual and very valuable information that we can use from this. So thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.
Okay, moving on. Item 3B, reappointment of Councilor Lucinda DeNovo to the Coos County Urban Renewal Agency Board.
As council's aware, city councilors serve as city representatives on a number of various committees, boards, and commissions. Currently, Councilor DeNovo has been serving on the Coos Bay as a Coos Bay City representative on the Coos County Urban Renewal Agency Board since October of 2018. The term of her appointment has expired as of December 31st, and Councilor DeNovo has indicated her willingness to be reappointed to serve on that board, and I'm assuming unless someone else has a greater desire to serve.
I do not. Does anybody else?
So this matter will be coming back at your next council meeting for formal appointment and then notification to the county.
Thank you, Roger. And thank you, Councilor DeNovo, for serving on that. Anybody else have any comments? Hearing none, I'll move on to item 3C, discussion regarding proposed amendment of council rules.
At your last meeting, the council discussed the possibility of, or the probability of changing your start times for your council meetings and your work session. Currently, start times are nestled within the council rules, and so it would be appropriate, should the council wish to move forward and move the start time till 6 p.m. instead of 7 p.m., those rules should be changed. In addition, I also included some language about virtual attendance, since the time that those rules were adopted and the last time they were amended, virtual attendance wasn't a possibility. If there are additional rules that the council would like to change, this would be appropriate time to bring that up. One such matter was brought to my attention. Our current rules state that public comment period is limited to 5 minutes. Although for the last several years, it's actually been administered at 3 minutes. That certainly could be changed. And you could also add some language that gives some latitude to the chair of the meeting to extend that at their discretion.
Roger, I believe that that language is already in here. Right now it says any member so addressing the council shall be limited to a period of 5 minutes within to make themselves heard. And then it says the council in its sole discretion may extend this time or may request further information be presented to the council on such date and in such manner as it seems appropriate. So I think the only change I would offer is changing that to 3 minutes.
I agree.
The way you read it, though, it sounds like it would be up to the presiding officer to go 2-3 minutes as we've been doing for the last several years. You really don't need to change anything because the way you read it, I don't know which section it
It
is.
says extend though, it doesn't say shorten. I gotta find it now. too.
Yeah, where?
But I think we might have some commentary in there that gives it latitude to even decrease it or some flexibility, I think, Roger, or because like if we have a lot of people, the other day we limited it to 2 minutes. So, I mean, I think it's a the situation determines how long people can speak for. I mean, I don't think we want to cut anybody off, but I think we want to make sure we can hear everybody too that wants to make a comment.
I kind of like keeping it at 3 just so people know. You know, when we do have a packed room and there's a lot of people and we want to bring it down to 2, but everybody's planned out their comments to 3 minutes and then we're like, oh, nope, it's got to be 2, and then they have to amend how they're saying it. It feels not great, but I don't know. I guess I'd be down for just a secured 5 minutes, or sorry, 3 minutes. But that's just where I'm at right now.
Yeah, he states that up front, though, and the way the language is with what you read, and you read it from the document, it gives him latitude to change, expand it. It specifically says expanding, but the way it is written, he can change that to 2 minutes based on what he sees, he or she, whoever the presiding officer is.
Where is it?
It's under 2.9.2, public comment. But it only says he makes, and it's the council may extend this time, but it doesn't say anything about shortening it.
Yeah. I see that.
I think we should change it to 3. And it sounds like, I get your point, Stephanie, but I think, and I don't know if we can add language that we have the ability to decrease it or increase it. Am I oversimplifying things, Roger? Can we do that?
No, you certainly can do it. Public comment is not a requirement under Oregon Revised Statute. It's placed here at your discretion, and the council has traditionally found value in listening to its citizens. Here it's just what your rules are about that. Certainly, you could give yourself the discretion to increase or decrease time based on the needs of that meeting.
Well, I definitely think it should be 3 minutes, and I agree with the commentary by, Carmen, that, we want to stick to the 3 minutes unless it just doesn't meet the criteria. I mean, becomes difficult to do because, again, we want to make sure that everyone that wants to speak, we want to make sure that you're able to. So can't we just put may extend or decrease this time? And that covers it?
Oh, yeah, it's a great idea.
I mean, first of all, if I'm the presiding officer, I'm not going to do this arbitrarily. I would definitely talk to the other counselors and see if they're in agreement with this. Because if we got to a point, I'll just give you an example, then we would have to probably say we have to extend the time from 9 o'clock by council rules and extend the time in the meeting to make sure we hear all the commentary. Now, I'm not sure that's going to happen very often. And in fact, a lot of the times, I believe that we should try to address the citizens' comment and whether the council can address it or the staff, instead of having them come back at a later time or having staff reach out to them at a later time to answer their question. I don't think they should do that either. So I think we just need to be amenable to this situation.
I would be okay with, putting the 3 minutes in there if we also included the language of extending or reducing.
I agree.
Because there have been times where there have been so many people to speak that, 2 minutes was sufficient, 3 minutes was a little bit better, 5 minutes would have been too long.
Yep, I agree.
So I've been reminded that the council already has the authority to amend its own rules by majority vote. So if you place it at 3 minutes, and should the council determine that it needs to change that to 2 minutes, you can, by your own rules currently, amend or deviate from the rules.
Guess we could.
And I've been remiss in doing that. So we need to make sure that we continue to do that. If that's going to be the case, I need to ask the council, are they willing to change their council rules for time constraints? And so I got to keep that in mind, or someone can kick me, Lucinda.
Well, I was gonna offer to the public that maybe viewing this tonight or at a later time, that you do usually connect with each counselor before you arbitrarily make that decision. I mean, we're aware.
What about maybe 2 minutes is probably the lowest we would go? What if we said something like, we will allow public sharing comments to be at 2 minutes, or at a discretion to extend that based on our own discretion? So everybody knows that we have the ability to do 2 as a public speaker, but we can set that at pretty much any. I mean, you give them the lower limit, I guess, and so
I'm
The only
opposed to
thing I
that.
see there is that, then it sounds like we're supposed to be voting when we change these rules, so we would have to be voting
Oh,
every
yeah.
meeting to change it to 3 minutes. So I
That's
think, I
true.
agree with Counselor Kilmer, we should just have it 3 minutes, and we may extend or decrease that time.
that makes sense. So we don't have to change it all the time.
I agree.
I think most people go less than 3 minutes,
Right.
but there are times when 3 minutes is just not enough time. And we saw that clearly at the last couple of meetings that we've had.
Yep, that makes sense.
So do you have your direction, Roger?
I do.
But also, Rob brought up, Roger, that all our comments need to be directed to you instead of staff. Is that still in there? I mean, I saw that still in there. Is that something we want? Does it matter to you, Roger, or does it matter? I mean,
It really is helpful for staff if you do it that way.
okay.
Because sometimes, and you are held in high regard by all of our city staff, and sometimes they may get the impression that when an individual council member talks to an individual staff member, that they're getting direction from the council. And that doesn't, it makes it more difficult when we're trying to follow unity of command, and we have a command structure that they're answerable to their supervisor.
Roger, do you mean just at council meetings or just in general when we're reaching out to staff for questions?
Well, per council rules, when you're reaching out for information, that should be done through the city manager's office.
And is the assistant city manager part of the city manager's office?
She certainly is.
Great, thank you.
Lucky you.
Okay. That makes
So
sense.
that's not in regards to public comments, that's with
No.
regard to something else?
No, it's,
Because I generally try to communicate with staff if we have a public comment that I have a question about, because then we get into a dialogue position that could go on forever.
no, this is really meant for outside of council meetings.
Okay.
Which makes sense.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just to be clear, that's outside of council meetings, but if the mayor says who's handling this, he's not going to look at you every time. If it's something that Jim handles, Jim's going to speak on it, or the chief's going to speak on it.
You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this topic? Moving on, item 3D, update on open volunteer positions on various city boards, commissions, and committees.
That's my turn. So we posted a vacancy there's 3 boards, commissions, committees that had vacancies with terms expiring in the end of December. We posted those for open notification, that notification expiring on January 20th. We unfortunately, or fortunately, not sure how you might look at it, but we didn't receive any outside new candidates. We've only received interest for reappointment for those whose terms were expiring. Typically, our process would be to bring those candidates who have applied in for an interview prior to a council meeting. You guys have the opportunity to speak with each of the candidates and then can make a decision at the council meeting to appoint individuals. So we're coming to you to kind of question that process, since you'll be interviewing people who already hold those positions and there are no other applicants, new applicants who had interest.
Well, I personally don't have a desire to interview them again if they're already served myself, but I don't know about the rest of the council.
I guess it's an interesting question, because I think that when we ask people to volunteer, we ask them where they're at, what their perspective is. I think some people have been on these commissions longer than we've been on council. So perhaps there's differing perspectives, and it is an interesting question. Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
No, I'm finished. That's all I have. It's just an interesting.
Well, first of all, I think that, okay, first of all, are we following the criteria, Nicole, that is set forth? My understanding is that we are not following the criteria in the municipal code and the charter. Am I correct?
In regards to openings?
To even appointing any positions, even if they're sitting on a position and they're the only ones, because truthfully, is that the municipal code states something different than the process that we're handling now.
I can take that. So I think I can take that, and for the most part, yes, we are. But in one instance, we are not. Most of your rules regarding committees can be found in the council rules. The appointment for the water board, though, is nestled within not only the charter, but an ordinance. So in our municipal code. And that, it states that nominations for appointments shall be made by the mayor and shall be subject to confirmation of the city council. Our process in the past is to take applications or letters of interest and then to either be interviewed or not be interviewed, because I've seen it both ways over the last 13 years. And then the council votes by ballot. But it's in the spirit of the ordinance, but it's not as in strict compliance. It's very prescriptive within the municipal code how that's supposed to happen.
So is it just for the water board position?
It is, and I think the water board is such, and it's very similar language in North Bend. It's because Oregon revised statutes had to be amended to allow two cities to own one utility. And that occurred back, I believe, in the 40s. And so that's why it's in our charters and in our municipal code. So, moving forward, we'll need to follow that. It's not simply changing the ordinance, because that's actually has its roots within the city charter, and the change of that would need to be voted on by the public. And it becomes even more difficult when you have it nestled in two city charters.
So
I think we've been
taking out-
following the intent by every meeting. We've been following the intent. It's just that, the procedure's not quite right. And but that doesn't mean that we haven't met the criteria either, because I have voted for all these applicants. And so I think we're fine. Are we not, Roger? So.
Oh, I think we're fine for that. I just think moving forward, we as staff will try and make sure that we're following our current municipal code, and we'll bring that to you more appropriately in the future.
So that would still include letters of interest. We would still advertise those positions somehow?
Well, and I think that's really up to the mayor at the time, whether or not the mayor at the time wants to accept letters of interest. That could be included in the process. You're not precluded from doing that. And the mayor at the time could use those letters of interest to make his nominations. The second part of this, which will affect timing, any nomination from the mayor has to be done in writing and provided to the council 2 weeks in advance.
Okay.
Nicole, do you have?
So if I made a nomination for the water board, is what you're saying, that it has to be 2 weeks in advance in writing?
Correct. I believe an email would suffice for in writing.
Okay.
I would also say a text would suffice in writing, because those are ways of communication.
Gotcha.
You
Going back to the original one, go ahead.
You do have time, even if we were to follow this process. If you didn't have something in writing tonight, we could extend the time for the appointment of the water board position until the second meeting in February. You've already extended the appointment for those that are currently in office, I believe, into March. So you certainly have time to follow the process going forward.
Well, first of all, I think that I'll address that. Whoever I bring forth, I think should be interviewed by the council to make sure that they're comfortable with the position I'm recommending. That's what I would suggest, even if it's just one person. Can I recommend more than one? Can I put 2 names in, and just in case the council doesn't agree with me? Or because they still have to ratify this position, am I correct?
Yeah, there's nothing that precludes you from bringing more than one name forward.
Okay. And the other thing is, I still think that we should probably interview even existing board members. Things change, and we might have different criteria that we're looking at, like the parks plan that we just got. Do they agree with the concept of the new parks master plan and what direction that we interacted with them? That's just an example. I know it takes our time, but that's my take on it. So I'm not sure how the rest of you feel.
I agree, Mr. Mayor.
I do as well.
I guess you have your marching orders then.
We do.
We do. Thank you.
Is there any further comments?
I have a few. I'm sorry, guys. First of all, the partitions that we have up, when we had our goal setting session, it was brought up by a few counselors that maybe it's time to bring them down. I was concerned with one counselor specifically, if he was comfortable, and he said he was up to the majority, how they felt. So I believe maybe it's time for them to come down, but that was just my comment. I'm not sure how the rest of you feel. And so it's important that you feel that way, or if you don't, then we can leave them up. Anyway, I brought it up for discussion.
Go ahead.
Well, after asking the 2 people that I was most concerned about, they seemed comfortable with it, and so I think it is time to take them down. I think that we were incredibly responsible to put them up, and I think at this point it becomes a barrier between us and the citizens. And I also think we've put so much pressure, or I've put so much pressure on staff to improve the sound system, that I know if we took these things down, we wouldn't be in the bubble that we're in today. So I think the sound would automatically improve, not only for council, but for the audience. So I'm in full support, since I know that, I know Mayor Benetti had a family member, and Councilor Miles were both concerned, and so I since you're both okay with it, I'm okay with it.
Carmen?
Yeah, I feel the same way.
I guess they're coming down. Unless somebody that's not here opposes. I think we should leave the one around the fire chiefs up.
He's had the smallest space this whole time.
Any other comments, Mayor?
Yeah, just one other thing. So there is an annual Battle of the Books Oregon Battle of the Books, and I've been approached to do that, and it conflicts with the time frame. I'm going to not be able to do it, and so I asked Catherine Hampton if I could ask one of the counselors to fill in, and she said yes. And usually it's really fun. The Pirates from Marshall get together, and the Bulldogs from North Bend, and they have a Battle of the Books, and it's really a great time. I wish I could do it, but if someone's interested, please reach out to me, and I will forward your contact information to her, and she can give you the information to how it works. So anyway.
What is the date and time on that again?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that, and I had it. Now I have to go back and find it. Let's see here. It is February 22nd at between 4 to 6.
Go ahead.
I only have one comment. We received very thoughtful emails from the city manager, the assistant city manager, to council, donating our time on Saturday for a goal-setting session. And I just wanted to thank the staff for giving up their Saturday to join us for that goal-setting session. And it's always a joy for me to go back through those goals to see what's been accomplished. And I know, we set the tone, but it takes the staff to step up and deliver. So I'm incredibly grateful for all of your efforts, and I can't wait to start working on the new goals.
Anybody else? I agree with Lucinda. Thank you, staff, and meeting's adjourned. How come you don't ever use this, Joe?
Pardon?
How come you don't ever use this?
Adjourn?
gavel?